This is why I think this is a consequential time and that it is a whole different situation. Had JFK survived and done what he was going to do, I believe, and his brother as well, was very aware of the international threat and what was going on, what was being built, we would not be here. Because again, NATO is another one of these tentacles. That is their military. NATO is not a defensive force, and many Nazis went into NATO, including the general of NATO. You know, you have to know about this. West Germany was essentially run by Galen, who was Hitler's head of intelligence, and Alan Dulles put him in there. So West Germany was run by Nazis the entire second half of the Cold War. It just so much has been also, speaking of Argentina, who was the head of the Catholic Church there? Francis, the last pope. So, I mean, like, all of this was decades of planning. And I believe when Donald Trump got in there, they were like, oh, no.
No, this
and that's
is not
why
part
I
of
say
the plan.
the coup against the United States was a global overthrow
100%.
of the duly elected president of the United
That's
States.
why it's treason. Because people, not everybody understands the difference between treason and sedition. And the difference is that when you collaborate with foreign powers, it goes from being seditious, subversive, to being treasonous. So, okay, Mel, this is super important, and it has never, in my personal view, never received enough attention. Let's just explain to people, for those who may not know, Operation Paperclip was an operation carried out by the United States of America that was literally set up to bring members of the Nazi Party to the United States right at the end of the Second World War, give them, as you referred, new identities, give them secret identities with their families, you know, and extend, I think some of them even extended families, and to bring them to the United States. They were given jobs for life. They were given security clearances, and they were brought, depending on their specialty, into different parts of the United States government. Alan Dulles and his brother Alan Dulles became the first official head of the CIA. Very significant person. I have been, you know, one of the few people pointing out from the beginning of the Ukraine war that when Vladimir Putin, the president of Russia, said he was going into Ukraine to get rid of the Nazis, he was serious. He actually meant it, because the Germans, when they invaded Western Ukraine, the west of Ukraine became the headquarters of the Nazi SS. That's where the SS was run from. This SS that was an occult organization that was involved in all things of the occult and black magic and Satanism and all the rest of it, right? And who protected the Nazis of Western Ukraine, of the SS, from prosecution and accountability at Nuremberg, at the Nuremberg trials or anywhere else? Alan Dulles did that. And so one of the things that happened is that after a certain period of time, the United States declassifies classified information. As we know with the JFK files, every time they came up for their declassification, they would say, oh no, find a reason to keep them classified. Well, when Operation Paperclip was declassified, and I would urge anybody who's interested, look for the Finders documents, look for the Paperclip documents, read this yourself. It's absolutely fascinating. Mel, I read exchanges between, for example, members of the CIA, leaders of the CIA, and American commanders. One in particular stood out. Because what I think people, you know, what isn't often told or talked about is the fact that at the end of the war, there were certain Nazi commanders that had been in charge of certain areas in Europe, like Klaus Barbie in France, right? And so there were countries like Italy and France and so on who wanted particular Nazis because of what they had done on their territory. So there was a couple of Nazis that were very much in demand, and Italy wanted them for what they had done to the Italians, and the U.S. had them. Okay, and so now the military has them, and the military wants to hold them accountable. And there's these back and forth letters documenting this, original letters between the military commander who had them and the CIA. And the CIA is saying, you know, they're arguing that these Nazi leaders were very instrumental in helping negotiate an end to the war, and they don't think they should be handed over to Italy. They think they should be brought to the U.S. And I never forget this American commander response. You know, as I recall, this war was won on the battlefield. Please remind me where we negotiated a settlement and an end to the war. Because by my count, this victory came in blood, and it came from our soldiers, not from negotiators, right? And that was so interesting to me, because what you realize is that literally when they're telling General Patton and General Eisenhower, you cannot show anyone what you find in these camps. As the U.S. military was going into the concentration camps, they were being told, you're not allowed to let the public in, and soldiers can't say anything. So Patton and Eisenhower together agreed to bring in journalists. They went against their orders, and they brought journalists in, and they showed the world. And so while you have literally bodies that stretch into the sky, bones and piles of glasses and teeth and hair, and all these atrocities are still being discovered, the people responsible for all of this under Operation Paperclip are being given secret identities and transported by no less than who gave them the passports? The Red Cross. And where are they going? Well, some of them are going through Austria. And where's the safe house where they stay? It's the Villa Carey, belonging to the Carey family of John Kerry, right? And so you start to wonder, wait a minute, this history isn't that far from us. The former mayor of New York, Bill de Blasio, was named, his real name is Wilhelm Werner Jr. He says he changed his name because his father molested him, and maybe that's true, maybe it's not. But no one's ever going to ask. Tom Steyer, the billionaire that ran for office who could barely string a sentence together, his uncle was a famous footballer for the Nazis. I mean, when you look at these people...
George H.W. Bush's father was actually called out for funding the Nazis. He had a bank that two of his partners were Nazis. The last name was Schreff. I mean, that's known about Prescott Bush. And then not only does his son become the head of the CIA later, and then the president, then his grandson becomes the president. And in all of the presidential campaigning from both Bushes, no one ever brought this up. Ever.
And there's actual photographs of the Bush family with Joseph Mengele and Otto Skorzeny and and other very, very significant Nazis. And how can that not come up in the press?
It didn't. And that's how we know that this was built so that look, what you said before is very important. I believe that the Dulles brothers, in planning everything post-World War II for international, a supranational architecture that ran above nation states, was already done. And I think that when they came back and John Foster Dulles went into the State Department ceased to work for the United States of America. It was the tentacle of the international banking cartel and the global public-private partnership that they created. The CIA, I don't believe, ever worked for we the people. I think it always worked to protect that international banking cartel and the global public-private partnership that it created with the UN and everything else. And then USAID, which of course came under Kennedy, but then Kennedy is killed, became the funding mechanism. And don't forget, in the document that was signed, the National Security Act, they essentially don't define what the CIA can and can't do. And 2 years later, they give them total immunity and secrecy and financial secrecy. So all of that leads me to believe that the architecture that was set up, because don't forget, John Foster Dulles went after State Department to the Council of Foreign Relations. And Alan Dulles stayed on as long as he could. JFK fires Alan Dulles when he's finding out all this stuff. He dies, and then they create the Warren Commission and put Alan Dulles on it. You just have to see, this is what I say about what we're dealing with now, is that it seems to me since the murder of JFK, every single person in intelligence that has been involved in a cover-up and for reasons of national security, crimes done by our government, never held accountable, those people that are involved in that get promoted. You can't look back at things like, it's odd that Oklahoma City was overseen by Merrick Garland, or that Enron was overseen by, Chris Wray and Andrew Weissman. And you can go through this and you see,
the same people over and over
they were
again.
Promoted.
Yes.
Not held accountable.
Horowitz is another one of them. Right? His name comes up over and again. You're right. They get promoted and they get put in there. They created a sort of an investigation, which is not really an investigation. It's basically how they control the narrative. Same as the 9/11
Yeah.
Commission, right?
Right, exactly.
Exactly the same thing. They answer what they want to answer. They write the narrative that they want to write, and then it's closed. Close the book. We're done. That narrative is now sealed. We live with it forever. I watched a documentary recently, a very lengthy one, on the Oklahoma City bombing. My goodness.
Yeah, me too.
Wow, we were lied to about that. There is so much evidence
totally.
that Timothy McVeigh did not act alone, and so many things that happened, and murders, by the way, of people who stored information and had real information.
A cop was brutally murdered.
A black cop, by the way, which normally would cause outrage, but no, not this one, right?
Nope.
No.
Nope. And we have to keep this in mind, because this is why they killed the president of the United States of America purposely live on TV to traumatize a nation.
Yes.
And to make us not ask questions and traumatize, frankly, the world. And then they are the ones that investigated it. This has happened over and over again. I believe it happened with the 9/11 Commission. I think we still have to get to the bottom of that. And anyone that is pointing fingers has to understand what they created is much more similar to what Orwell says about the state in 1984. The people that are involved in the supranational architecture that has sustained all the presidents since World War II, really, they don't have an allegiance or alliance to any people, to any religion, to any country, to any flag, to anything. They are power for power's sake, because they believe that they are entitled to that power, and that they actually own this planet, this world, and that we are just lucky that they let us live here. Well, the United States decided that wasn't true, and that is the question we all have to ask ourselves is, do we want to continue down this path, or are we going to allow, finally, the supranational architecture to achieve it? Because, World War I, they tried to do a world government with the League of Nations, but it was explicitly a world government, and America rejected it. The United Nations, which came out of course, San Francisco, they too wanted a world government, but it wasn't explicit. It was about all the things that the Charter of the UN says. The opposite has happened. There's been endless wars, poverty by design all over the world, capture of nations by the IMF and World Bank nonsense of their fake loans. I mean, it's been one after another. And again, you want to know why the World Health Organization and the UN and all these never get held accountable? Well, because that International Organization Immunity Act of 1945 also protects the United Nations and 75 organizations connected to the United Nations, even the ones on our soil. The United States has no jurisdiction to investigate, audit, or bring legal action against the IMF, the World Bank, the United Nations, or any one of those 76 United Nations connected groups to this day in America. And the American people don't even know that. So we legitimately have supranational organizations on U.S. soil that are not of our jurisdiction in any legal sense.
Which are being funded primarily by American taxpayers.
1,000%. All of it.
Yeah.
NATO, all of it.
Yeah.
The entire global warming nonsense since the 90s when they all came up with it. And, an unknown community organizer happened to be in Rio when they announced there would be Obama, when Clinton announced the global warming thing. The American taxpayer, we're talking about trillions of dollars. We not only paid for the entire Cold War, we also paid for the entire reconstruction with the fraudulent Marshall Fund of Europe. We paid for the EU, and then we paid for the entire war on terror, which was a war on a tactic with no defined enemy, again, like the Cold War. And then the American taxpayers, I believe, have paid for the entire global warming narrative, which was really always has been about capturing all of the natural resources for exactly what they need them for now. So the American people should realize, regardless of what operation was played on you, whether you're the inner city black people that they went after with the crack and the Planned Parenthood, or whatever group, the farmers or the military that they decided were domestic terrorists because they love America, every single one of these operations was to divide and conquer America. But the truth is we have all equally been victims of the post-World War II supranational infrastructure that is run on our soil, right in our faces, acting like everything is normal, and it's not.
And if you look at it in a spiritual sense, Mel, what you're talking about is when you said these people see us as resources, yes, because they see themselves as gods. They're pantheistic. And so they believe that they are, that's what this elitism, it really leads to. That's what it's really about.
Yeah.
They think that they're better than us. I just sat next to a guy on a plane, you know, who was telling me how it's outrageous that all these dumb people, these racists and these bigots, that their vote, he said, the thought that their vote counts the same as mine. He said, that's so outrageous because they're so stupid and they're so, ignorant, and they basically have no right to exist. They're horrified, right? This kind of elitist mentality, when you follow that to its natural conclusion, because these people rarely believe in God, they see themselves as gods. They see themselves as rising above that. And then we are just a resource to be harvested. So when you're a sovereign nation, it makes no sense to outsource your manufacturing capability to a foreign power. It makes no sense.
It was all by design.
Right. It makes no sense to let them manufacture your medicines, your construction equipment, your fertilizer for your food, your gunpowder for your weapons, right? It doesn't make any sense. But like you said, they looked at the US. Here was where they were going to manage money. Here's where they were going to manage, these resources, those resources, because as gods of the whole world, right? It all belongs to them. And we are here to be harvested for their needs. So if they need your blood, because they're all out there, talking about how blood therapy, young blood keeps you young forever. I mean, it makes them nuts when I talk about this. But it's true. They do blood therapy. They're out there having blood transfusions with young blood. I'm not the one doing that. That's not made up. It's all over the internet. USA Today, NBC, all these people have done stories about how young blood is the secret to not aging, because they believe they can reverse aging and they can never die. They'll never die. And so they look at all of us as, okay, here we need these people's organs, we need these people's babies. What about that horrible Canadian guy, was it Peter Maynard, who used to bring girls to his own island, not just Epstein Island.
Oh, Nygaard.
Oh,
right.
Peter Nygaard, the Canadian. And there he is on camera telling these black girls that you guys have, the jackpot because of your genes, right? Because you don't age. And what you should be doing is selling your eggs, selling your womb, right? Selling your DNA. And that's what these people are all about. And the power structure that they set up, they used the catastrophe of the Second World War that obliterated so much. And out of the ruins, this is what your book is really about. Out of the ruins, they created organizations and systems of power that are still in place today.